Well, thank you, Don Sussman, for the introduction. It is a pleasure to be with you all here today. As Don pointed out, I am indeed a farmer. Could get in trouble for this, but it's the truth, the only working farmer in the United States Senate. My wife and I literally mean my wife and I, run an 1,800-acre farm in north central Montana outside a town called Big Sandy, population 600. It is the same land that my grandparents homesteaded a little over a century ago. It's the same land that my folks farmed for 35 years. Both those generations were FDR Democrats, and they were FDR Democrats because they knew that without the policies of FDR, their grandson and son, myself, would have never had the opportunity to take that farm over. My wife and I have been married for some 42 years this year, actually, and we've been on the farm for 41 of those, and we've raised some pretty good commodities. I'd rather call it food, but in this particular case, commodities are a little better. Things like peas and wheat and oil seeds and even children. But with our kids and grandkids quickly becoming scattered across the United States, it is just the two of us, no hired man. My wife is a hell of a woman. She can do everything I can do, and she is doing that right now as I'm in Washington, D.C. on the farm. It is planting season. We're just wrapping that up. We've been racing to get the seeds in the ground between the wet weather and the service in the United States Senate. And during planting season, we think a lot about the phrase, "you reap what you sow." It is a phrase that Democrats looking to connect with rural America would be smart to heed. We hear a lot of pundits talk about rural America and what folks in towns like Big Sandy, Montana expect from their elected leaders. I am no pundit, but I am a product of rural America. And while my flat top haircut or my odd number of fingers on my, I guess that's an even number, on my left hand, the fact of the matter is that I live by the values of rural America, but make no mistake about it, those values sell in both rural America and urban America. And it is why I believe that Montana's reelected me in 2018 after Trump won a presidential election in 2016. So what should Democrats be sowing in rural America? My parents always said, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, act accordingly. And so I think that politicians are great at coming in and telling people what they should be believing. But the truth is, in rural America, I think you ought to start out by listening. And if you're able to meet the people where they are and listen, that's a good start. And I think folks in rural America think the Democratic Party has stopped listening to them. And in fact, I can tell you that there are political consultants, maybe some in this room, that have already pulled rural America off the electoral map. I think that is a huge mistake. And because of those things, I think rural voters believe that all politicians aren't fighting for their families or their way of life, and they're not listening to them. But the truth is rural America's values are things like accessible health care and good paying jobs and affordable education. Those are our values. And quite frankly, they are progressive values. And they are exactly the values that we all need to fight for. And they are exactly the values that this administration has attacked time and time again. Take health care. Number one issue in the 2018 campaign as far as concerns in rural voters' minds across Montana. This administration's singular focus has been on dismantling the ACA, dismantling rural hospitals, rolling back Medicaid expansion, which has impacted 90,000 Montanans, which might not seem like a lot, but it's nearly 10% of the folks that live in Montana. And I would just say this. I talked about my grandfather patenting the land in 2015. 50 years after that, in 1965, we were able to build a hospital in my little hometown of Big Sandy, Montana. Now, for the first time in 50 years since it was built, that hospital may well be looking at potential closure because of the policies that have gone on in Washington, D.C. and this administration. There is opportunities out there, folks, for Democrats, for progressives, if you want to talk about health care in rural America. Education, I would just say this. I don't need to tell you guys, nothing has done more to make this country the leader of the world than public education. It is the great equalizer. It is the thing that gives everybody a shot at the American dream. Yet this administration has done everything within their power to try to privatize public education, voucherize it, send it off and charterize it, do whatever you need to do. But the fact of the matter is, instead of working to build public education and make education what it needs to be, this administration is tearing it apart. There's opportunity in education in rural America if you've got the right message. College affordability. Look, my grandmother and grandfather, and I'll put it on my grandmother, they had 4 kids. 3 of them were girls, 1 of them was a boy. All 3 of those girls in the 1930s went to college and got a college degree. In the 1930s. Okay? They did it partially because they thought it was really important and they could do it. They could afford to get them off to school. They knew how important college education was. I went to school and the folks pretty much paid for my education. They had the ability to do that. In the 1960s and 70s, they made enough money on the farm they could send my 2 older brothers and myself to school. When my kids went to school in the late 90s and early 2000s, we could afford about half of it. My grandkid, my granddaughter, in another 4 years is going to be in college, and I dare say my kids are going to have a hard time paying much of that. We need to make college education more affordable. If we're going to have our next generation of well-trained workers, of entrepreneurs that are going to drive this economy forward, we need to have education that's affordable. It is critically important. The other thing, and you don't hear a lot of Democrats talk about this, but I think it's important in rural America, is the debt. We're pushing $22 trillion of debt. Fiscal responsibility is important, and we will be the first generation to inherit from our parents and borrow from our kids. That is not something that's good. And we can deal with the debt. And it doesn't take, you don't need to be a nuclear physicist to do it. Let me give you a couple examples. And this has no impact on working families or small businesses. A couple of months ago, I was in McAllen, Texas. Got a chance to look at the border wall on the southern border. A border wall that's going to spend $24 to $32 million a mile. A border wall that, quite frankly, in my opinion, and I would debate anybody on this, is going to create more problems it's going to solve. A border wall that is going to provide security to no one. And something that we could do with technology for literally pennies on the dollar. So let's start there if you want to start addressing some debt issues. Let's start talking about that tax bill that we passed a while back that added $1.5 trillion to the national debt and has caused us to have a structural imbalance in our budget today of $1 trillion a year. That's the kind of stuff we should be doing. That is smart politics. By the way, and it's smart politics for rural America. Another lesson that my parents taught me is your handshake means something and that your word is your bond. I don't say this as an overstatement. I say this as an absolute fact. Trump's handshake is worth nothing. He's quick to make a promise. He's even quicker to break it. 25 years ago, the American bankers saw him for what he was and quit doing business with him. And over the last 2.25 years, we've seen our trading partners and our allies say, no more. We want no more to do with this dude. And pretty soon, I think the American people will see that too. They're starting to see the impacts of this reckless trade war that we're in. They're starting to see the impacts of ripping away health care from rural communities. And his attempt to get tough on China has only tightened the screws on folks like me in family farm agriculture. And it is no secret that our folks in production ag are hurting. Commodity prices are down. Folks are filing for bankruptcy at an alarming rate. And those who are making a living off the land are seeing our market access disappear. And the Republicans' promises of better trade deals ringing hollow. Let me give you an example. I don't remember what I did last week, but I will tell you in May of 1978, I went over to my neighbor's house. That's when we took over the farm. And I said, I've got a little bit of wheat to sell, Willard. It's at $3.50 a bushel. Do you think I should sell it? Willard said, you know, it's been banging around that for a while. If you need the money, sell it. I sold it for $3.50 a bushel. A month ago, I called the little elevator in my town to see what hard red winter wheat was worth. $4.14 a bushel. That's not inflation-adjusted prices. It's a fact. We're going to lose one of the two most important things to our democracy, public education being number one, family farm agriculture being number two, if this administration's policies continue on as they have in the past. So, look, I could talk about climate change. I could talk about, which has had amazing impacts on my farm. But the truth is, and this administration has completely written it off. And if we don't start doing something about that, you want to talk about draconian actions that our kids' generations are going to have to take. It's not going to be pretty. But Republicans have gone after our schools. They've gone after health care. In rural communities, it's a killer. You lose your school, you lose your hospital. It's not if. Your community is gone. We understand that as Democrats, as progressives, and our leaders and our candidates have bold initiatives, often bipartisan plans to drive down prescription drugs, to incentivize teacher hiring in rural schools, and to keep the doors open in health clinics. My folks always said, don't make a promise you can't keep, and it is true in rural America. But rural Americans appreciate hard work, and they appreciate talking truth. Unrealistic promises of things like totally free college or jobs for everybody and a living wage doesn't make sense in rural America, because it doesn't make sense. You've got to figure out how to get that done, and I don't see how you do it with just words. In my family, it is more important to show up and to be yourself and not be a rubber stamp. I will tell you that when I ran, Trump come to my state 4 times. Pence came 3 times. They tried to make little Donald came a whole bunch of times. He's thinking about running for governor in Montana. But the fact is that I didn't waver. I stayed with what I had done for the last 2 terms before that. We talked about what was important to rural America. We talked about health care. We talked about education. We talked about infrastructure. We even talked about climate change. And I'm going to tell you, in the end, when the distorted view was put forth and people went to the ballot box, they said, you know what? We know who Jon Tester is, and that's who they voted for. So in conclusion, I would just say Democrats don't need to call rural America home to get our support, but they certainly can't ignore the folks who live there. If they want to connect with rural America, come in, listen to the concerns, communicate a clear, no bullshit vision. And truth is, neither party has all the answers, but the fact is Democrats have good ones that work. One last thing I will say, and that is that if you don't show up, you don't get the vote. If you're running for the legislature, you knock on every door. If you're running statewide, you go to every town. I'm going to tell you something that concerns me a lot, and I think it's why we lose elections. When you get a legislative candidate, you get a little clipboard, and you say, knock on these doors. Don't knock on those doors over there. Just knock on these doors. I think this holds true for urban America as well as it does in rural America. But you knock on every door if you're going to win. You knock on every door. And the folks out there that tell you you're wasting your time when you're knocking on that door, well then, as Max Bach has told me, go figure out where you can get some more time. Because the truth is those people are important, and those people are the folks that if you can get them to vote for you, you'll win that election. So lay out common sense initiatives, listen, don't be phony. Guess what happens? We win in 2020. God bless you all. Thank you.